Hey, everybody. Welcome to another Weave Intelligence interview. I'm here with Boyan, CTO at SIXT. Boyan, thank you for doing this. How are you doing?
Luca, thank you for having me.
Awesome. Well, look, like we were just talking offline, we're in this chats. They're mostly conversations, right? We're really just like curious to get your perspective as a leader in your enterprise. I'd be curious to even hear some of the numbers if you can share, like, how large is your engineering organization? What's your footprint? How many applications you support? Because I think I've heard in informal conversations. I'm not sure what's shareable publicly, but there's some really impressive numbers that you guys deal with. So just starting there, just to like level set for people, and maybe also just giving us a sense of like where you guys are at in your platform engineering journey. We've been going back and forth for years now. You've been on stage at PlatformCon, so clearly you're one of the pioneers. But just level set for the audience. What are we talking about when we talk about SIXT IT essentially and platform engineering, and where are you guys at in your journey?
Sure. So maybe let's start macro. Product and engineering at SIXT is about 800 people. It's a quite a sizable setup for a mobility provider. Main reason is that over 95% of the software that we use or the core software that we use in the hundreds of countries we serve business-wise is built in-house. So that obviously requires a lot of engineering, and at the scale we operate, we obviously depend on systems and AI and data science to drive our business processes. So that's when it comes to the macro. When it comes to platform engineering, and I have shared that story also in front of the platform engineering audience. We've spent over 10 years now building up our platform capabilities to the point where we have a number of platforms pretty much serving all the different modalities of engineering. We have MLOps, obviously business and product engineering, um, etc. Right? So uh, that's how things look at. We go for pretty much full-blown automation. We try to take care as much from the uh, cognitive load for the product engineering teams as we can. The idea being our business is pretty complicated. Our products are pretty challenging to build,
Mm-hmm.
and we want to focus everybody 100% on that versus reinventing how to do deployments or how to do anything that does not add up to a great product experience for our customers. That's pretty much a strategy. Obviously, that's one side of it. The other side of it is we believe the more we can automate centrally, we can also save costs, and we can move much faster because we don't have to go and drive, I don't know, plumbing changes in every single team for every single application we have when we
Right.
want to change course. That's pretty much the doctrine, so to speak,
Yeah.
that we operate in. And we've only, if I look at what has changed in the past, I don't know, 12 months, we've only doubled down on that now with AI,
Right.
because obviously this part changes a lot pretty much daily
Yeah.
for engineering and for how we build software and how we ship it and what are the experiences that we're trying to craft. And on the flip side, we've also welcomed a lot of new builders on the platform. I think what traditionally was the scope of our platform engineering organization was really the engineering teams. Today, we welcomed thousands of new builders from our
Oh,
business areas as
amazing.
well, who are able to also build software for themselves to improve their productivity, the productivity of their teams, and we are trying to create experiences for them as well.
Right. No, I love this, and we made it 4 minutes into the conversation before saying AI, so that's good. But we're gonna go back to the to the AI and the, I guess, like the citizen developer that you sort of like mentioned there, in a second. Just on the platform engineering, because I think it's not common to find somebody that has 10 years experience, like actually building and scaling a platform initiative in an enterprise successfully as well. So what is what are where how did you start, I guess, right? What was the initial sort of like momentum? Why? How much executive support did you have at the beginning versus now? I imagine now is just like, hey, this is the stack that we operate in, period, right? If you don't want this, here's the door. Go work somewhere else. But obviously, I'm assuming that's not how it started. So like, if you can just like quickly, just take us through that journey, because I think that's where most people that listen to this are still kind of like stuck. And then we're going to get into the fun future stuff in a second.
Sure. I mean, if I think 10 years back, right, we had a number of challenges. One of our challenges was how quickly can we ship things? Our organization was pretty fragmented between core engineering, operations, product and business around that as well. And net result of that was it could take us, I don't know, 2-3 weeks to ship an application once, or our monolith once at that point,
Mhm.
uh, which is a lot of opportunity cost if you think about it. And it also resulted in us being very slow when it comes to delivering the value that we want and the experience we want. And the second challenge was because of those silos, and because of the speed. Obviously, deployment is just the cherry on the top, right? A lot of the processes in such structures are slow.
Right.
How do I get infrastructure to build this feature that I want to deliver in a couple of weeks? Or this thing takes, I don't know, between all the discussions and the meetings and the tickets, 3 weeks, 4 weeks. Let me just try to figure out if I can self-serve, and therefore I'm going to just start using this thing there, which might not be the best tool for the job, but at least I can get it in tool. That
Mhm.
was the thinking, right? Which
Mhm.
causes a lot of fragmentation. So we also suffered from a lot of fragmentation in the landscape, a lot of different teams basically reinventing the fire and the hot water.
Right.
And this did not help.
Right.
So this was the status quo. And the last piece, which as we were looking to or reviewing in the end, what stops us to be faster, what stops us to deliver customer value quicker. The other piece was what I already mentioned. It was pretty clear that we operate in a very challenging, complicated business environment just by the nature of our business and the scale that we operate at. And then we were looking at, again, instead of the teams focusing fully on the business problem, which is, getting it done in the way we want it to be done, it's saying something.
Right.
They would be spending 30-40% of their time just figuring out how do I deploy this thing. And when that is unsuccessful, all the investments of fixing it, debugging it, etc. Because again, back in the day, fragmentation also meant you might have your own logging stack, you might have your own observability stack. So problems.
Yes.
This is where we started, and
Mhm.
we decided to start structuring some of that early on. The idea was
And were you brought in specifically to fix the fragmentation, right?
pretty much. So I was brought in to help do our cloud migration back in the day and build a couple of products. That was pretty much my scope.
Mm.
And as I was going about how can I do that, or how we together can that get that in the fastest way, but still meeting the standards that we have as a brand, um, basically a few things emerged. Uh, I wanted to make sure that we can compress the time it takes from an idea to production. And what that meant was I have to start obviously with the organization itself. So how the organization is cut. And when I was started on this journey, it became pretty clear that if I want to reduce this fragmentation, if I want to have less meetings, if I want to have basically the people focus on the mission and on distractions, uh, it would mean that the engineering teams would have to own a lot more. That was the net result of my thinking there back then. And platform engineering was not a thing, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, Nowadays, obviously, you say this word, and most people, I guess, click what that means. But back in the day, that was not a thing at all. In fact, if I go back 10 years ago, the dogma there, or what people were broadcasting, was you have to always go best tool for the job, That was it, right? Everybody should have their own cloud account and, just build whatever makes sense for the mission of the team. That was actually what was,
That's
so to speak,
wild, right? To think about.
that was it, right? That was it. That's what was people were doing. That's what consultants brought in to advise you how you should, do things better, would recommend. So when I was
That's
looking at
easy,
it,
right? From a consultancy, it's an easy job, right? It's just like, hey, you're a kid. Here's all the toys and all the candies. It's like,
this is it, right? You
fun.
go, you train your organization of the bread of cloud that you've chosen, being AWS,
Right,
GCP, whatever it is, and then they all just own their own accounts and build on their stuff and profit, right?
right.
It's just gonna work. That was what everybody was suggesting back in the day. That's also the advice we were getting, or I was getting. And when I was started working from, just basics, first principles, what I actually want to achieve, and the mother did another back then was, well, if I empower my teams to actually have more responsibility, and they're already 150% busy with what they have today, something is gotta
Something's
give,
gonna give.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And if I now tell them, hey guys, I have great news going forward, you also own this other stuff. So
Mm,
it's now really end to end. Congratulations. And by the way, because it's all, based on the latest consultancy, you now are also responsible for the infrastructure
right.
success. It felt that it's just not going to work, right? It's
Yeah.
just not going to work. And my background back in the day, I was coming from high scale startups,
Mhm.
building basically systems really for scale. And I saw firsthand that it's not like uh, it's easier said than done. Let's put it
Right.
this way. It
Right.
does take certain level of expertise, but if it's done right, and if you can find a way to replicate and automate, you get to basically massive returns, both internally and externally. And this is where the idea came. Hey, if we extend that responsibility scope for the teams, and if I find a way to take out all those things which are kind of the same, everybody has to have them, right? Being observability, being build system, being deployment systems, like all the teams have to have that. And as we start chunking out our monolith into service-oriented architecture, I have to invest in foundations, ideally, so that I can enable all the other teams to deliver faster. That was pretty much the idea. We run with it. And coming back to your original question, we started with some teams to prove that this really works. In fact, if I go back all the way in the beginning, when I was building the first product here for SIXT, it was actually one team that was building both the platform and the product on it. And then after that,
And it
we
was
started
dog fooding
spreading
it.
out.
Right.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly. And from there, we started expanding. We added a second, a third, a fourth product on top, which meant obviously multiple applications, which obviously added complications and requirements also for the platform itself. In the beginning, again, it was a one platform team really doing everything end to end from build to runtime, everything really, kube clusters in cloud automation, the whole shebang. From there, obviously, we started expanding. We obviously had to also scale the platform team because we also took a very, I would say, again, even back in the day, maybe even state today, unorthodox approach. We didn't just do the what you would say infrastructure automation, right? The cloud
Mm,
automation. We also went and um, made sure we have standards for discovery library, service to service communication, circuit breakers, anything that again applications need to scale as well,
right.
all the way to frameworks, how we want to build applications. And we wanted to make sure that the experience for a new engineer starting in any product engineering team is you just join, you can ship something in your first day, which meant it has to be production grade, meaning logging must be there, observability must be there, ideally out of the box, right? Because in one day you don't have the time to
Yeah.
wire it in and explain it all, right? It just has to be there.
Yeah.
And you don't have to think about it. Um, so this is the experience we went for, which obviously
Great,
put a
man.
lot of
Yeah.
strain.
Mm,
And from there, we started scaling. So for the past years, we basically have been evolving this concept. We started with backend. We moved it also to front end, investing heavily in design systems for mobile, for web, when it comes to platforms and how we do basically how we ship our apps, how we ship our websites. Um, and then we moved to MLOps, etc. So that's how things evolved for us. In terms of landscape, I think you asked that as well. So we have thousands of applications. We have, if I just look at something like web, for example, right? We have over 400,000 web apps or web pages, just to
Wow,
think about it. Um, so
crazy.
yeah, we went from what, 1 to 2 deployments a month. Nowadays, it's 120,000,
That's crazy.
130,000. It's very different. It's a very different setup, and I think the setup proved itself many times over. So
Well,
we
clearly, otherwise you
continue
wouldn't
betting on it.
feel that you are. And I guess like just talk to me about the exact support that you had throughout this, right? Like, was it, did you have to like hard sell this initially, and then over time, as it proved itself, it got easier, and then it hit an inflection point where it was just like top down imposed on new teams, new hires, and so on. Did you, or did you constantly had to like make the business case for it, or maybe they were supporters since the beginning? And I guess like maybe as you tell that story, like also because I'm always also like really interested when I talk to people like SIXT, and by the way, we didn't say it, but like for people that don't know, like you mentioned, it's a mobility provider. If for people who've never rented a car, and don't know, like right, SIXT is like one of the biggest rentals, if not the biggest rental, at least in Europe, maybe globally, and so I think it's interesting because we often talk about platform engineering in the context of software. But obviously here we're talking about, software and like real world assets, right? Cars and, so like, I think maybe it's also interesting if like, as you go through the journey, talking about the executive support that you got or didn't get, what are some of the challenges and maybe like specific, I guess, like failure modes that exist only in mobility rental systems and this type of systems that you're dealing with?
Yeah. So in the beginning, right? First of all, I think that's very unique for SIXT. I have to mention that because it's important for the context. In the end, at SIXT, it's really all about responsibility, and you get a lot of freedom when it comes to execution, and then it comes accountability.
Right.
Are you getting
Well, it's a
results or
family
not?
run business, I think.
It is a family-run business, and that makes all the difference in
That
terms
makes
of
a big
decision
difference.
making. So in the beginning, we obviously went over the logic in terms of how we're making those decisions and those investments. And there I got, or I received, because I was in a company, a lot of support to go in this very unorthodox way, despite, again, the consultancies lined up saying you should
The
go in a
opposite.
completely different direction, right? Just
Right.
that has to be clear.
Yeah.
At that point of time, in the end, the leadership team, the CEOs had to make the decision, hey, we've had this guy for a year to do a project for us. He's saying we go left, and everybody else who has been consulting us on the problems we have is saying we should go right.
Right.
And they still took the bet with, so to speak, me at that point.
Yeah.
So that
Yeah.
just has to be said here.
Yeah.
Even though wherever you Google, right, it will tell you that's the way you do it.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
And you know,
Yeah.
just to be said, for me, basically, I'm a pretty unfiltered guy. If I believe something, I just go for it, and that's that. So
Mhm.
those two things came together. And afterwards, the investments was lined up. Obviously, we had pretty frequent check-ins in the beginning. Everything else said and done, are we delivering value or not? And at some point, again, the value becomes pretty clear.
Yeah.
However, you start looking at it, team compositions, velocity compared to before, and are you shipping things on the street or not, right? And then, you know, the rest follows. But you would imagine in the beginning it would have been a leap of faith, right? Because everything you look at
As
it
yeah.
says go right. Anyway,
Yeah.
so that was in the beginning. Otherwise, you asked me about failure modes, etc. Obviously, it's as I mentioned, it's a lot of systems. It's a pretty complicated landscape, a lot of different processes. By the way, Carento is our biggest business by far, but we have a lot of products on top as well. So we, at any point of time, have car sharing, car subscriptions, completely different systems and businesses, ride hailing. Again, our executive ride hailing as well, a very, very different business. And all those platforms, they have to connect, right? In the
Right.
end, we want to deliver one customer experience for everybody, despite if they use one or many of our products at the same time. And I think that's pretty much the challenge for the whole thing. And as we design those products and especially those platforms, we always have to think about, um, what is the common denominator or the smallest common denominator where this thing still has an impact, moves the needle. But again, we don't drown in complexity because otherwise we just cannot move.
Right.
So I would say this is the challenge for us that we always have. And in the end, making those bets and, for the ones that don't pay off, killing them early. And for the ones who do pay off, doubling down. That's pretty much, in the end, the game, so to speak.
Right. And I think I heard before the story, right, of like actually, thanks to the fact that you had been working on platform engineering for so long, when COVID came around, you were in a much more versatile position as an organization to be able to pivot and actually, like reallocate load essentially across these different products that you mentioned, if not even launch new ones, right?
Absolutely. Actually, if you take me back there, this is a great story. That's how we built our subscription business, right? Because when this happened, a lot of people needed cars. There was a lot of uncertainty. They were not sure if they want to buy a car, but what they were sure of about, because nobody knew how long COVID would take and all those restrictions. What everybody knew was, hey, I don't want to commit to a, I don't know, 4-year lease plan, not knowing where everything is going to go with jobs, with my family, with this disease and everything else combined, right? And we wanted to serve our customers, and we came up with this product, and we managed to ship it in a matter of a couple of months, which for us at that point of time and at the scale that was shipped, it was a record time if you think about it. 2020. So
Crazy.
it's crazy how quickly you can ship gears if you do have all the ingredients around. And on the flip side, um, again, if we had to start from scratch and reinvent everything, I think that would have taken us 2 or 3 times, even if we commit obviously disproportionate resources
Resource.
to go for this opportunity.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Well, you know, let's shift gears because, like, talking about the versatility and the speed, right? Like, you mentioned at the beginning of the conversation two things that I think are really worth unpacking. So one is, we're now obviously AI is turbocharging the need for platform engineering, right? This is, I think, one of the very interesting maybe not completely forecasted things that happened in the last 18 to 24 months, right? Obviously this like huge AI spike in everywhere in the world, also in the enterprise. And then all of a sudden, platform engineers are maybe one of the most important roles in the enterprise because without a well-designed platform, it's going to be really hard, if not impossible, to go from like the impressive day zero demo prototype to something that's actually day 100 enterprise grade production ready. And increasingly, I think every enterprise, even the slowest ones at this point, are waking up to this and are like, okay, well, I just really need to get my ducks in a row if I want to, be able to compete and leverage AI. And so this is obviously turbocharging the need for platform engineering, like you said, but it's also massively expanding the audience that platform teams are serving, right? So we're going from the traditional focus on infra and DevX and therefore effectively on application developers to adding, data teams, data scientists, MLOps engineers, so on as kind of this like outer rim. But then quickly you mentioned everyone else essentially, right? Like responsible citizen developers, right? Like every business user, every user in the enterprise now can be empowered actually to build stuff. And effectively, if you don't empower them, they'll do it anyway, right? So like, and so then it's like, how do you reconcile that? And then eventually, the outer, I guess, superset is agents, which obviously terminally will be 99.99% of the users of the platform. So, how are you seeing that transformation? Because I think once again, Sixt is really ahead of the curve here, and I think you're experiencing, or you already actually are going through stuff that most other enterprises are going to go through in the next couple of years.
Yeah, I'm not sure if we're ahead, but we are definitely working hard on this topic because we also see the challenges there. And it's exactly as you said it, right? So platform engineering roles, and I see it also in the community, have grown a lot in terms of just openings across the board because a lot of companies have woken up to the challenge that demos look amazing. The moment you try to actually do it for real at enterprise scale, uh, the fragmentation I spoke about and everything else that you don't have at that point starts cutting very quickly because you can't secure those things, you cannot audit those things or those agents at that point or those solutions. Even the agents themselves don't function that well because I don't know. Uh, eh, Take data, right, which is the goat when it comes to agents actually doing work in a business. If you have your data in 20 different or 30 different silos, and you just point your agent, go figure it out. Yeah, it does hallucinate a lot. Yeah,
Right.
context window, even with 1 million context, not enough.
Yeah.
And you also you don't have the right environment for those agents to even leverage their power, right? Because again, agents nowadays can also go and build tools for themselves, how they pass, analyze data sets, etc. But you don't even have the environment for that. You don't have the environment to run the code interpreters, right? And this is where I think a lot of companies struggle, and what is obviously elevating the need for more standardization and for actual automation of those platform capabilities.
Yeah.
For us, we focus on a couple of areas. I think you pointed it out. We also see that the agents will be the biggest user of the platform.
Mm.
And we believe that from everything we see and from the agents that we're running in production, that the technology what we had in the past is just not enough for that. It's not fine grained enough, and it's not addressing the agent needs in the best possible way. So we're investing heavily to build agentic platform capabilities, um, think identity, right, and a lot more dynamism into that when it comes to access management and everything else that they're doing with their tasks than we've ever had for humans. Um, think better APIs for them. Because what we have, for example, for our customer facing things or even B2B or internal APIs, they're built for well deterministic systems. And now with agents in the mix, we believe we can build much better APIs for them so that they can get to the solution much quicker and more efficiently, if I think token bound. So those are some of the areas that we are investing heavily. Obviously, the whole observability stack is a very interesting space. You mentioned also Synthesis developers. That's yet another modality. Yes, now people can solve a lot of problems for themselves. And at Sixt, what we've had always is, I don't know, we have so many ideas how we can make our customer facing or internal products better. But even if we double our organization, we'll just never get to everything that we have on the plate, right?
Right.
Even with AI, even if we have, I don't know, over 75% of the code written by AI today, there is still much more on the table. And again, coding is also not, the only thing that is between you and shipping something to prod. So
Right.
uh, you never have enough resources is pretty much the line I'm looking for here. And um, if you look at the business teams, there are always topics which maybe don't move the whole organizational needle. If one of them is addressed, it's a very person specific or a team specific topic. But
Mhm.
think about if you are able to actually address 40 or 50% of those small topics
Yeah.
across the whole organization. What is the multiplier of that
Yeah.
for the whole org?
Yeah.
And that's kind of what we started tackling there, where we said, you know what? Not that much, we are afraid of shadow IT, although obviously it's there for everybody. It's more, hey, if we unlock this, we will be a much faster organization. We'll be a much more capable organization. And that's what we started investing there. One, a lot of the pieces that we have for engineering, well, they're pretty much the same that we need for everything else. So reuse heavily. And then two, then we started looking at what would be missing to empower people who basically not engineers to produce, well, applications and
Mm.
solutions for themselves to solve their own or their team's problem, right? That's kind of the mindset there. And I think the technology is coming pretty close to fulfill this vision, quite frankly. It's improving on a weekly basis for us when it comes to the models and the automation that we can put in place so that in the end, citizen developers can go with an idea and ship it and share it with colleagues, so to speak, in minutes, right? That's pretty much the goal there. With, again, as much of the concerns when it comes to observability, security, the fact that they are not engineers and you cannot expect that they understand what a build system is
Right.
or what, I don't know, even, I don't know, things like GitHub, right?
Yeah.
Where how do we manage code, right? Because they
Yeah.
don't touch code. They
Yeah.
just speak with Claude or Codex or
Yeah.
whatever the tool of the day is, and things are happening for them, right? And now at some point they can assess that the solution is good enough, it solves their problem, and they want to share it, right? This is where they stand, and we want to take care of everything else behind the scenes for them as much as possible. That's kind of the thinking there.
I love that. I love that. And so does the role of the platform engineer in this new era essentially become really worrying about the sort of this like deterministic harness around, the probabilistic nature of, agents and LLM systems and so on. And what's the and because you mentioned observability, like how do you think about observability? I'm really curious because one of the last interviews that we did was with Mirko Novakovic, the founder of Dash Zero and previously Instana. So it was very instructive because obviously he has 20 years experience, like just in the observability space and how they're thinking at Dash Zero about the evolution of the space. I'm really curious about your perspective as an enterprise practitioner. Is it because you go, I've just came back from KubeCon. You go, and it's still you have like all these tools, right? And it's like it just feels like an overkill at this point, right? When when actually like it's probably going to consolidate on something relatively at least simple from a front end perspective. That's not probably going to rely so much as in the past on all these different UIs, right?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, again, I have my opinions here, but again, Mirko is an expert in this. I haven't watched the episode yet, but I'm sure he
Give us
knows
your
better
opinion.
observability than I
Over here.
am. Um, the way I think about it is this, right? The job of the platform engineering, at least when it comes to this scope, is you want to ground the models as much as possible when it comes to what is being produced so that you get to whatever non-functional standards you have in your organization, right? While we're never going to make them deterministic, you want to make sure that a bunch of things are checkmarked, ideally out of the box, which means they have to be simple.
Mm.
And that needs to happen, so to speak, without expecting that the person in front of the computer has any idea about asking for it, right? That's challenge number one. Challenge number two is in case the model does get it wrong, because again, as humans, models also get it wrong or forget things, depending on many factors. You want to make sure that you have enough loops around that process to make sure that if something is forgotten and is important, that's flagged.
Mm.
And that's kind of the architecture we're building there.
Mm.
If I can just describe it in a few sentences.
Yep.
We infuse a lot of that within the tool of choice for people to, so to speak, build their solution, where we try to inject all those best patterns to happen already at the building phase. That's the easiest to get them. And then this agent that is running locally is speaking to our platform agent, which is basically guarding our vibe coding platform. And when it tries to deploy, additional loops, for example, will kick in, review the code, make sure that those things that we expect are there. If they're not there, the agents actually collaborate on, hey, you should have done this thing, you haven't done it, go do it.
Right.
That happens without any human intervention at this point of time. You ask me now observability. I mean, I think about it in a similar fashion, right? So one, it must be infused from the beginning, because if it's not, problem.
Yeah.
Um, and much of the technology for that is already there. So that's actually not the hard part. When it comes to UIs, I agree with what you just said. I think of it in a similar way. I think, well, I have, let's put it that way, I have a very explicit taste, so I do enjoy good UIs.
Hmm.
But in the future, I think they'll play a bit less of a role in terms of the static nature that we're used to, right? One size fits all kind of an experience, which is how SaaS companies have been developing in the past. I think that's just going to go away,
Yeah.
because reality is, what I actually want is not to monitor every single experience I have in the very same way. What I do want is the best observability for the problem I have at hand.
Right.
And that might mean different views, that might mean different depth as well, depending on the problem, depending on what I'm looking at. And I'm much of a believer that this will all be done on demand, very similarly to how business analytics, I think, is going to transform in the months and years to come. So you would like to have your agent figure out the whole breadcrumbs for you and ask you for a decision, unless one is needed from you, or in most cases also take action for you, because it doesn't need you to figure out that your application is crashing, and some mitigation actions should be in place, right? So this is how I think about observability in the end. And especially if I look at the vibe coding platform and what we're trying to build there, this is the direction we are more or less taking. Like, again, I cannot expect that the person in front of the computer, our business colleague who has absolutely zero technical knowledge,
Mm.
would be the one who is going to be steering the debugging uh, uh, um, uh, processes, right? Ideally, I want an agent which just looks at it and says, "Hey, this thing is broken, and I can do this, or I can do that, or I can do this third thing." As far as business, so to speak, impact is concerned, the guy can take a call. When it comes to the technicalities of it, the agent should be just taking care of it.
Right. Super interesting. So we talked about observability. You know, like in general, one of the key trends that we've seen in the community is, like we're discussing here, platform engineering really moving beyond the traditional DevX and infra focus and into observability, security, obviously data, obviously I. You know, those are the fastest growing segments in our community today for a reason. And so we've covered kind of the observability side. I'm really curious about your take on the security because, you know. Um, like I said, I was at KubeCon a couple weeks ago, and we hosted this roundtable conversation together with Cloudsmith. Obviously, you know, it was very kind of like on the security side of things. And then this one guy really like kind of like said it in a very broad way, but I think he had a really good point, which was like, well, look, if it's not about security, what are we even talking about here in terms of platform engineering, right? Like, so like in a which I don't necessarily fully agree with, but it's true that in an agent first world, you know, security becomes, you know, the baseline concern. Like if you haven't solved for that, then everything else is a nice to have, essentially. And I think you know, I don't know if you saw it. I mean, probably you've seen it, right? Like, Anthropic just released this like mythos
Yeah.
and like, but we only release it to 40 companies because otherwise it's too dangerous. And we all know this is coming out in the wild, like if it isn't already, right? So, you know, what does that mean, right? Because I think we are probably on the verge of this like vulnerability apocalypse. You
Yeah.
both because these models are getting really really good at finding them and spotting them and exploiting them, but also because, you know, despite the vulnerability per 100 lines of code or whatever the metric going down, as in, you know, in AI generated code over the last few months, because the AI generated code is going you know, so much higher, in the end you end up with a much higher number of absolute vulnerabilities that our systems are just not designed to handle and to prevent before they get out. And then, you compound it with systems that now can exploit them. So, you know, I don't want to be too doomerish, right? But like, how do we think about this?
I think I wish I had a great answer for you, right? I see the same threat. The reality is, even stay today with not with Mythos, right?
Yeah.
But take Opus 4.6, GPT 5.4. Uh, Everybody keeps saying, hey, comparably to Mythos, for example, right? They're nothing compared in terms of how quickly they can find vulnerabilities. What type of vulnerabilities you can chain to get to some zero-day hacks, etc., right? That might be true, but even the current models are actually pretty good in
Mm,
finding vulnerabilities in large code bases. And even if they're also better in building, I don't know, more, how do I call it, secure code? I'm not sure I want to use that word, but
mm,
uh, uh, bug-free solutions. The reality is, and I think it's also state today, is very rarely where I see that the biggest, I don't know, vulnerability came out of some function that didn't get enough unit tests or enough love, right? The biggest vulnerabilities usually come at the boundaries of applications and processes when integration points happen, when, regardless of the company, its size or structure, multiple teams come together because there is just so much additional context and so much complexity that nobody can reason on its own about all the side effects that a
awesome.
change
Yeah.
in a large system or in a large distributed system can cause. That's where things happen. And today, the reality is even models are not good enough for that just because they lack the context. And what we lack is actually platform capabilities
Right.
that can expose that amount of context for them. I'm sure if there was a way or we had that more mainstream, also the models will be doing a better job, but the reality is in most companies, there isn't a such thing, right?
Yeah.
And I think this is where things might start getting worse before they get better in the beginning,
Mm.
because from the outside, it's much easier to
Yeah.
exploit those things,
Always.
right?
Yeah.
Always.
Yeah.
And as soon as those models get the ground running, I think, yeah, there will be interesting developments across the board. I think the way to solve this, and at least what we're focusing on, is what I just mentioned. So I think one part of the puzzle, and it's not by far the silver bullet, but for sure it's a piece of it, is larger shared context
Mm.
for processes and code base and the applications that take place. For example, what we are doing is we have like platform capabilities that are able to give the model understanding about all the different applications, APIs, and I don't know, asynchronous communications that are taking place within a process. I think that's extremely important for a model so that it knows how to ground its exploration and figure out if a change is made somewhere, what would that impact?
Mm.
I think that's one aspect of it. Obviously, the other piece is really on a fine-grained business authorization level. How do you make sure that this is basically followed in every single application, every single API that you do at certain scale, especially if we believe that agents will be writing all the code, right? This, call it skills, call it again shared non-functional understanding, and the ability to also verify that, right, is very important. I think one part that, or one how do I call it, pattern that has worked well for us, and we have to expand, is having different layers, and within those different models, verifying the initial work to make sure that, I don't know, bluntly speaking, if Claude misses something, Codex catches it, right?
Right.
I think that has been working pretty well. Yes,
Mm.
it's definitely the more expensive way to go about it,
Right.
but it does, we do see some returns there. Those are the two pieces that just come off top of my mind. But coming back to your, so to speak, statement that security will be a big part of what platform engineers do, I fully agree.
Yeah.
Uh, it will be an immense part of everything you
Yeah.
do. Think about data access and how this is governed. Now it becomes a much more complex problem because you have a lot more permutations of where this data, how this data will be accessed, who's going to be accessing this data, and where this data starts living its own life, right?
Yeah.
In the past, this was a more manageable topic just because of in company processes plus, again, humans being slow. Now that stuff is exponentially more difficult just because agents are very quick and very creative of figuring out how to solve a problem, starting to access or request access for data sets that in the past were just not part of this process.
Right.
But now they believe that they can optimize it this way. How this is governed, how this is managed, this whole thing is going to be interesting how it gets solved. And I guess we'll have to deploy more AI, right? In the end, that's going to be the solution because
Yeah.
the old way of doing it is just not going to be sufficient.
Yeah. It's almost like be careful what you wish for, right? Like it's like you want it to have all these capabilities and you want it, as from a platform engineer perspective, right? Like you wanted to build this entire system. Now it's like now it's like now we need to grow up, right? Now it's the
Yeah.
time that's like, okay, now it's like, okay, you wanted this, okay, boom, here's the load of the entire enterprise. And I guess like to close off, like what is your, if any, I'm just curious because I was just having a conversation about this like right before this. Um, you know, how do you see the future of enterprise in general, which is something that, we are really when we think about platform engineering, at the end of the day, 99% of the usage is enterprise, right? Like it's obviously you can actually take the same principles of platform engineering and applying them into like a small team. And, I think, we have done this in the community. We're like a team of 15 people and we've been dog fooding platform engineering as hard as we can. And I think we've seen great ROI actually from but obviously there's a just economies of scale, right? The bigger you are, the bigger the impact. And I think you are the sort of like leaving proof of it at SIXT. So, but in an age of, crazy agents and agents being 99.9% of the usage of the platform. And, obviously, we're already starting to see the first like $1 billion companies, the guy that was selling GLPs or whatever. So obviously this is a huge like wealth creation opportunity for I think like small teams and individuals. But what does that mean for, you know, what now is the number one customer of platform engineering, which is large enterprises? Do you get a sense?
Well, I think the cost for sure is going down, right? With the cost of software building going down as well. I see that very clearly, at
Mhm.
least from where I stand. And I also think the barrier to entry, if we can use this for platform engineering, also going into mid-sized and into startups, right? It's also there
Yeah,
because, it's also lowering because
yeah, yeah,
uh, what stops you now,
yeah,
right? To go and agree on a couple of standards. Actually, agreeing on a couple of standards with 2 or 3 people is a bit easier than agreeing with a couple of thousand.
yeah.
Um, and then have your agents follow them. I think this is where it starts, right? I think today what is different is that uh, as a solo founder, as you start building your thing, now you don't need to do the first 10 hires in the first couple of months as you're growing this business, right? Now
Right.
you can actually start with your 10 agents
Mhm.
that at least at the beginning are doing your bidding. You can agree on standards, how they work, what is the quality, what is the handover gates for yourself. That's already the building blocks, so to
Yeah.
speak,
Of the
and the
platform.
foundation of the platform.
Yeah.
How those agents work? How do you guys review each other's work? How do you have your agents communicate to you? When, right? How many gates? How do you reviewing each other work? How do you assess the work, so to speak? What are the harnesses? Oh, I hate that. What I almost made it without saying it. But
I
what are
baited you into it earlier and you
you
resisted.
did. I almost made it. God. Anyway, what what are those shared capabilities that you infuse in your system early on? That's already your platform, and in fact, you can do much better than what we had to go through in the past to get there, because you don't have to make the most fragmented, broken spaghetti world. And at some point, once it becomes, I don't know, a scale up and you understand that, hey, performance is not there, I can't add features anymore. Only now I'm going to start, fixing that stuff. And only now I'm going to start rebuilding, because usually that's what it means, right? Nothing stops you right now, if you have a little bit of taste about the whole thing and a little bit of understanding about where you're going, to say those foundations from the beginning and .md files, right?
Yeah.
And have your agents start just conforming to them. In fact, if you would be building that multi-agent system to bootstrap your hopefully $1 billion venture as a solo founder, you probably should already think about it from the beginning, because otherwise it's even hard to scale agents as far as the same way that it's hard to scale, people.
Humans.
So, and teams, yes. So that's how I think about it. I think, in fact, we're going to see a lot of platform engineering approaches in the agentic world coming from startups. While in the past, most of those were coming from the AWS, the Netflix of those worlds, right? I think we're going to see something different here. I think we're going to see, especially for small companies, a lot of the patterns coming from those solo founder guys who are running 10, 20, 30, 50 agents for themselves, and figure out a good way to orchestrate and manage them.
Yeah.
And what I think we're going to see from larger enterprises is a different pattern. There, I think what we're going to see is, how do you scale still sizable teams and make them productive with agents? Because that's a little bit different. I think the solo gig is more or less, I wouldn't say so, but there is a lot of clarity how things go there.
Mm-hmm.
I think what's unsolved in the industry at this point of time is how a lot of individuals that, so to speak, comprise an engineering product team today get 10x as a team
Right.
with agents.
Right.
And not this 20, 30% that you see today, right?
Yeah.
I think this is going to be super interesting, and the patterns for that are going to come more from enterprises.
Right. And do you think enterprise are remaining, 100, 200, 300,000 plus people, or does this mean
Compressing. I think we're going to see both ways, right?
Right.
I think it's not a function of the technology or AI that much. It's a function of business.
Yeah.
So I think the math there is pretty simple. If you have been running a lean setup with as few layers as possible, right? Which for me is good operations, regardless of AI or not AI.
Yeah.
Then you probably are going to grow your team, because now, again, if you have a successful business, you don't want to stay at 5x, right?
Yeah.
You want to go 100x.
Yeah.
I mean, growth is why you have a business, at least in my world.
Yeah.
Or at least I'm not a fan of, small, minuscule, just keep going kind of gigs. Some people are, I'm just not.
Yeah.
I think business should grow. So I think those businesses that want to grow and have a winning business model, obviously they want to try
Full
to
grow
get that
agents and people at the
500x.
same time.
Obviously, right? Because now you're going to be more business niches. Now you're going to need also a lot more people to manage some of that. Yet, obviously, a lot more agents as well. So it's not going to be a linear scale business niches or business markets to people as before. But you'll probably not scale down your team. You'll actually scale it up.
Yeah.
And on the flip side, companies who struggle with their core business, well, I mean,
Well, they'll scale everything down.
obviously, because it's about efficiency.
Yeah.
And efficiency in that context would mean I need to reduce my cost. So if I can have 10 people do what 20 were used to do before, then I'm going to go for 10. If that's the way I can, so to speak, continue on the path that I am and not go bankrupt. So I think we're going to see both, but it's not that much, AI changed the world. I think that it's pure business.
Excellent.
And do you have a successful business or not?
Yeah. Listen, love it. Boyan, thank you so much. We're exactly on the clock. This was super, super interesting. Thanks again for your time, your insights, your experience, and sharing it with the community. And will we see you at PlatformCon again? Will you hop around for a yes? Awesome.
I'll try to be there. It was
Awesome.
great last time.
All right. Thank you, Boyan.
Thanks, Luca.
Bye bye.